Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and this is the Marcus Didius Falco book number 1, The Silver Pigs by Lindsay Davis. These are a series of mysteries, murder mysteries, and so on. The idea is, imagine if you will, sort of that stereotype 1930s gumshoe. That dame came into my office and I knew she was trouble, so I stubbed out my cigarette and that guy. We've all seen the cliches. But imagine that taking place in ancient Rome, that instead of him drinking whiskey, he's drinking wine because, that's just a thing in ancient Rome. Instead of you're working in dollars or pounds or some other form of modern money, you're dealing in sesterces. So this is roughly that kind of mystery, and it has a lot of the same quality, a lot of the same writing style that you would expect, but there are a few key differences. The first is, of course, this is in ancient Rome, and so everything going on in here is ancient Roman. I would hasten to add that Lindsay Davis first had this published in 1989. And in the two forewords, because this is a re-release of there was a 2000 release where she did a foreword, and then there was a second foreword on a 2010 re-release. And the thing about this is that in 1989, there were things that people believed in terms of what the then current archaeological framework was for viewing ancient Rome, how people thought of ancient Rome, how the experts thought of it, and there have been a lot of changes since the late 80s. And one of the cautions that she put in her foreword was that while she had done her due diligence and research, she cannot account for things that have changed in the past, 30, 40 years since the initial publication. 30-some years. Because, it's like the then fairly accurate, in many ways, dinosaurs of Jurassic Park are now considered wildly inaccurate, not merely scaled up for drama. If anybody is going into these and is a modern and current expert in ancient Roman stuff and happens to read the book and say, wait, that's not a thing, it may well be that that's not a thing now, but was back then. But the other thing about these books, and about a great many of the best historical novels, is that the best historical novels make sure that you view people from history as people, because humanity has not evolved very much since our ancient caveman days, and so people in ancient Rome were still people. There were a lot of social strictures there that they had that we do not. There were some social strictures now we have that they didn't. But the point is that while the technology was different and certain rituals are different, people are still people. And so, and of course also we as a Western audience, the basis of much of Western culture comes out of Rome, comes out of how much the Roman Empire, how much time Rome spent tramping around and invading everybody and insisting that everybody had to live like them, which is going to leave its imprint culturally. And so there's going to be a lot in terms of just how people thought that is the same. And so as you read this, there's a very familiar sense in how things work. But putting aside the ancient Rome thing, there's another big difference which she brings up, which is that Didius Falco, unlike most of the, 1930s, I was smoking my cigarette when that dame sauntered in the door, gumshoes, most of them are not merely single men, they are men living in splendid isolation from anything remotely resembling a family. Marcus Didius Falco has, yes, he has an absent father, but he has an extremely present mother, a great many sisters, a great many husband-in-laws. He has nieces and nephews, and his favorite niece is his deceased older brother's daughter that his older brother never knew about, that Marcus takes care of because his brother died out in Judea and did not return, and thus has had no opportunity to take care of this child. And The Silver Pigs opens with, indeed, a young woman who, to an extent in this opening, while she is being chased rather than sauntering into his office, Falco nonetheless does bring her to his office, and she is, in a way, very much trouble. But he sort of starts falling a little bit in love with her. She is younger than he is, but, he's not an old man. He turns 30 in the course of this book. And so a man of 30 interested in a young woman of 18 or 20 years, I'm not entirely certain how old Sosia Camilla is, I don't recall off the top of my head, that's not a wild gap for ancient Rome. But in any event, also, she's entirely above his touch anyways, because she is from a noble family, and he is a plebeian, and from the very bottom of the heap. So she comes running to him because there's some sort of scheming afoot, and he starts to investigate and stumbles into a complicated scheme of stealing money from the Roman emperor, from the, imperial government, from a whole, there's just this really a hefty conspiracy going on. And unfortunately, the young lady who he had set out to help, Sosia Camilla, gets murdered. And in the due course of events, he doesn't give up on it, gets properly hired, and has a whole whack of adventures. But during the course of this book, we still get not merely the usual cast of characters, his police officer friend, who is one of the, whatever they call the, those guys who acted as police in ancient Rome. I don't remember what they're called. It's obviously mentioned in the book, but you know me, I don't take notes. So his friend, he has his friend, he has his various hangers-on, but his mother is a very strong presence in the book, at first merely by implication, but she does start showing up. His sisters are strongly present, again, mostly by implication. But it gives him a very strong family life, which is unusual, again, for that classic investigator, private dick, trope that this is trying to evoke. So it's really, really interesting. It's got a few political twists and turns in it, including a unfortunately horrifying stint as an actual slave, because this is ancient Rome, and in ancient Rome, one of the things that you did with captured people, with runaways, is, put them in mines as slaves. Now, Roman slavery was still slavery, though it was in many ways qualitatively different than, say, American black slavery. It was nonetheless slavery. So the mine slavery thing is appropriately horrifying with some appropriately horrifying imagery, but it's it adds to the grimness and darkness of to the darkness of the narrative. It adds a heaviness to it, a weightiness to it, and an increase in the stakes, because there's a lot in this that is fun. There's a lot in this that is light. There's a lot in this that is, I didn't like my sister's husband, and it wasn't just the fact that he worked for the other racing faction that I prefer, because you have the blues and the greens, because everybody had their racing factions in ancient Rome, which was, partly political because everything is politics, but also partly just tribal sports fanishness, and we all know how tribal sports fanishness is, because I say this as somebody living in a city that has a historical sports rivalry with another nearby city, which has been going on for 60 years, 70 years, however long those teams have existed years. We all know of sports clannishness and how that works, and so, doesn't like her husband because of that. He also doesn't like her husband because he doesn't like any of his sister's husbands, but it's sort of one of those additional factors that just makes him worse. So that's not serious, and that's not dark, and so there's a lot of humor in this, there's a lot of lightness in it, but there's also some very, very, like I said, some very, very weighty threads in this novel, in this series, that occasionally just come down like a ton of bricks. So it's a delight, it's fun, it's funny, it's not too heavy, but it has its moments. And as an introductory novel in which we meet his future wife, this is a great one. And well worth the many, many weeks I had this on hold while waiting for it to finally come in so I could reread it for this channel. Because we had a copy of this book. We often had a copy of these books, and in this case, as with several other cases, the book has vanished and we don't know where it went. And I know we had a copy because that's how I read this book for the first time, was plucking it off of the shelf and reading it. Anyways, so that is, I think, all that I have to say on the Silver Pigs. Oh, if you're wondering, Silver Pigs, it's a shorthand that may now be historically inaccurate regarding lead tubes used for transporting silver across the empire, which makes them tremendously heavy because, lead is remarkably heavy as a metal. And I believe it was meant to be something about how they were made that left them with a sort of an end that looked like an upturned nose, and so it got nicknamed a pig. Which, that's how things happen historically, so it's not really shocking that people would think that it was that. But anyways, it has to do with stealing money from the emperor and also possibly funding an assassination. But either way, that's everything that I have to say about this book, which is long enough to not do a pocket summary anyways. And, yeah. So I will see you all next week.